Yes, I do read more than just fantasy on this channel. However, it is my favorite genre. And if you're looking to maybe branch outside of fantasy, I have 6 books that I think you might like based on being a fantasy reader. Starting up first, I actually recently read this, Book Lovers by Emily Henry. That last page ache, the deep breath in after you've set the book aside. Allie, this is a straight romance. What if I don't like romance? Hear me out, because I don't particularly like just romance. Emily Henry, I feel like she writes literary fic with love. She does beautiful imagery, setting up the setting for each location, even though it's set in our world. She just makes everything feel cozy and real. And specifically in this book, our main character, Nora, she is dealing with a lot of things. The girl has grief from losing her mom at a really young age in her early 20s and having to take care of her younger sister, and then being with like no money, and she works like crazy ton of hours to make sure that everyone is okay. And it's really cool because she is a literary agent, so if you like reading books about writing, you get that with this book. And then she has this really great story with her sister. You are sort of sent on the journey with her and her sister. They go to a small town. Her sister wants to really live that small town life that you read in small town romances, which I personally, I don't really enjoy those, but there was something about how Emily did it because Nora rejected it so much, but sort of like, I don't want to be a part of this. It came off very cheeky, like not mocking it, but it felt like a very untraditional romance. And I really love it for that. And the romantic interest, Charlie Lastra, he is the editor that is working with Nora on a book for one of her clients. He also feels like he has his own stuff going on. He doesn't feel like he fit in where he grew up, except for when he found reading. I think a lot of people can relate to that too. That's why I love this book so much. I will now read any book by Emily Henry. Like, she's an auto buy for me. All right, next up is another book I have also recently read. This is from one of my favorite genres, second to fantasy. It is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna, and this is a historical fiction book. It takes place during World War II, specifically in France when it was occupied by the Nazis. But love has to be stronger than hate, or there is no future for us. It talks about 2 sisters, one whose house becomes occupied by a Nazi, and the other sister who leaves to go fight in the resistance. They essentially become their own soldiers in very different ways, and they both had a very traumatic upbringing, which makes it hard for them to understand each other and the choices they've made. They still have their father. They lost their mother at a young age, but their father has PTSD from World War I. When he came back, he was also destroyed by the war, and this book really talks about what happens to you during war, understanding who you are and what you do in order to survive and fight for what's right. This story is beautiful, and I think it's so worth it, especially if you love historical fiction or you want an into historical fiction. I'm so happy I picked up this book at Barnes & Noble's. The Lost Girls of Paris by Pam Janoff. But the truth was, when it came to grief, each person was an island alone. I'm so happy this was a book that I chose to pick up after not reading for so many years and get me back into reading. It is a roller coaster of emotions. It is also taking place during World War II. Do you see a theme here, guys, with my historical fiction? And this one is really cool because it deals with 3 different points of views. We have Marie, a character who is British and she's undercover. And then we have Eleanor, who is in charge of the British girls that are going into the French resistance undercover. And then we have Grace, who takes place in the present, and she essentially finds a suitcase, and curiosity drove her to pick it up in Grand Central Station, and she finds these photos of these young women, and she is propelled to figure out what happened to them. What does this mean? Who did the suitcase belong to? And it's really fun to switch through the POVs to understand the story and solve the mystery that Grace is on. Again, it's the whole historical fiction thing of relating to fantasy, of like high stakes, there's war, you have to make harsh decisions. I love it, but you just have to read it. So read it. Next up, Where the Crawdad Sings. If anyone understood loneliness, the moon would. Drifting back to the predictable cycles of the tadpoles and the ballet of the fireflies, Kaya burrowed deeper into the wordless wilderness. Nature seemed the only stone that would not slip midstream. Considered literary fic, but it's also a coming of age story. It's a mystery, it's a thriller. It's about this young girl, Kaya, who has a very traumatic life, and she essentially is left alone to live at her family's home in the marsh at a very young age. She has to learn how to take care of herself. It feels fantastical to me because her writing is so immersive, and then you're on this roller coaster trying to figure out who killed Chase Andrews. I actually did an entire video on this, breaking down Taylor Swift's song, Carolina, explaining where I believe her lyrics came from based on what happens in the book, which was so fun to make. So if you haven't watched that, please definitely consider checking it out. So these last two books technically fall under the wide umbrella of fantasy, but let me explain. This is A Lesson in Vengeance by Victoria Lee. I drew a card from my deck when I woke up, the Nine of Swords. I replaced it, shuffled, and drew again, and got the Nine of Swords for a second time. Fear and nightmares. So even before I see her, I know Alex is coming tonight. And this is technically considered a dark academia. The reason why it falls under the fantasy umbrella is because there is kind of witchcraft in it. That's probably like the only real element of fantasy. Otherwise, it is set at a private school, and the school is built upon the burial of these witches. The school is actually named after those witches. But we follow a untrustworthy narrator who was returned to school after the death of her girlfriend, and it was a horrible, traumatic accident. And Felicity is trying to just get her bearings and not be reminded of Alex at every turn. And she meets this new girl, Ellis, who is a young writer and there to work on her new story. And she's really interested in Felicity's past, and she wants to sort of know more about also the Dalloway sisters. So she's trying to pull Felicity back into that world. Felicity thinks that one of the Dalloway ghosts killed Alex, her girlfriend, or cursed them. So she's terrified to enter back into that world. You have all these like spooky sort of horror vibes happening with ghosts. And it's really interesting because you're trying to understand what happened to Alex because Felicity doesn't want to talk about it, but it keeps popping up because this is a first person POV from Felicity. And like I said, she is untrustworthy. You're on a bit of a roller coaster there. And last but not least, The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson, who she is now an auto buy for me. I love her writing. The forest is sentient in a way a man is not. She sees with 1,000 eyes and forgets nothing. This book is kind of a lot of genres also. It's considered fantasy again because there is witchcraft, and I also feel like it has dystopian vibes, also with historical fiction and supernatural horror. It's also a YA book. Our main character, Emmanuelle, is trying to understand her past. Her mom was considered a witch, and so was her father, and the witches were considered to be women that followed Lilith and the devil's path, and they were condemned to the forest, and so no one really goes into the dark forests. No one really understands, not even our main character, until you read it. And there is also an epic scene in this book that I did not think we would get that feels very fantastical, like it's out of a fantasy book. Those are the 6 books that I recommend if you are trying to branch out and read something besides fantasy, because sometimes we're like, that's all I really read. Maybe I should read something else. And most of these books do not have any lower stakes. They're just set in a different world with a different genre, so we're technically not leaving the drama and the stress behind. If you liked this video, please consider liking it, subscribing, and leaving a comment. This is essentially the easiest way to support my channel and help me grow. So I appreciate all of you for being here, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.